Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah, we have learned a lot from our dear professor, from Ibn Sabit, from Ibn Hazm, from Ar-Rumi, from Iqbal, and then we learn also from our dear Professor Kamal. Alhamdulillah, I think we can go on with this class until forever. There are so many scholars that we have not touched. I think for us who are generalists, not specialists, this kind of thing add to our understanding, inshallah. And then for those who are specialists, they can delve more, they can read more, all of these main ideas, and also the controversies, inshallah. Tonight is our last class. Without further ado, we invite our dear Professor Mahmud to continue with the class. Prof.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. This class is going to be the last one of a series of lectures that I have been presenting on major Muslim writers. In our last class today, we will be discussing one British writer. Her name is Shelina Janmohamed, and she is the only female author that we are discussing. This is not deliberate. It's not that there are not many Muslim women writers who we could discuss. It's just incidental that I chose 6 male authors and the last one is a female author. So I believe we need to discuss a bit of background of Shelina Janmohamed, and we also need to talk about contemporary Muslim writers in the West, and then we will move on to her book. The book that we will discuss tonight is Love in a Headscarf. Now, Shelina Janmohamed was born in London, but her parents are actually of Indian origin. They were transported from India to East Africa, Kenya, and then from Kenya they came to Britain. I hope many of us know that during the British colonial period, there was a mass movement of people from one country to another. For example, in Malaysia, we have people from China and people from South India, who the British brought into this country. Similarly, from India, the British took many people to East Africa for their own colonial purposes, perhaps to make railway tracks and this and that. So they were taken from India to East Africa, and Shelina Janmohamed's ancestors were actually from Kenya in that sense. But in the 1970s and 80s, there were some race riots in East Africa. Indigenous local African people, they were harassing the Indians and were saying that you are not from our country, you are invaders or you are outsiders, so leave our country. So the Indians were suffering from racial prejudice and racial attacks. And finally, the British government gave them a choice that you can come and settle down in Britain. So this is how Shelina's parents ended up in Britain, in London, where she was born. So even though her parents came from Kenya to Britain, they are of South Asian origin. So in the book, she is actually talking about South Asian culture, South Asian Muslim culture, and British culture, and Islamic teaching. There are 3 triangular discussions in the book. Now, before I go into the book, I want to discuss the background of such writers in the West. We have many writers now in the West. For example, in America, we have Mozakaf. In Canada, there is a very good Muslim writer. Her name is Huda Khattab. In Britain, we have Kaizra Shahraz, Layla Abu Layla, Shelina Janmohamed, Naima Robert, and many other writers. In Australia, we have a writer, her name is Randa Abdul Fateh, of Palestinian origin. So these are some very powerful, very competent writers who are now raising their voice and representing their identity and their Islamic origin, their Islamic Islamic identity. So this is a new trend in contemporary literature. In the past, Muslim women were largely marginalized. When I say in the past, I mean during the colonial period and afterwards. Muslim women's voice was not often heard. They were marginalized, and they were represented by other people, or they were talked about by other people. Their voice was unheard of. But this group of writers who we see in today's West, in Canada, in America, in Britain, in Australia, and obviously in other Western countries, this is a new group of writers. What they are doing, what do they talk about in their writing? In order to discuss this, I want to share with you a quote. This is a quote. I'm sharing it in the chat box. This is a quote from a novel. The novel is Sweetness in the Belly. Sweetness in the Belly. And the writer is Camilla Gibb. She is of British origin, but now she lives in Canada. She has a PhD from Oxford University. So she wrote this book, Sweetness in the Belly. And in this book, one character, her name is Nouria, she is saying to a younger character that maybe one day you will write another Ferengi book and tell the truth. Maybe one day you will write another Ferengi book and tell the truth. So this small sentence tells us a lot, that for generation after generation, Muslim women were talked about by other people, and Muslim women were often misrepresented. Their image was distorted. Their identity was doubted. So all this while, other people talked about Muslim women, especially in Western literature. So this Nouria is saying that maybe one day you will write another European book, Ferengi, and tell the truth. So you will tell the truth, you will tell the world what Muslim women stand for. Who are Muslim women? What are their experiences? And this and that. So this is why this particular quote is very relevant when we discuss writers like Shelina Janmohamed and others. So I thought I should share with you this important quote from Camilla Gibb. Now, during the colonial period, there was huge scholarship, so-called scholarship, on Eastern societies and Eastern cultures. And much of that scholarship was devoted to Muslim women.
Okay.
Okay, sorry, I had to tell my daughters to stop talking. So for a long time, especially during the colonial period, there was some kind of scholarship on Eastern societies, and much of that scholarship was devoted or concerned Muslim women. And we regard that kind of literature as Orientalism or Orientalist literature. We have a very long list of Orientalist literature that concern Muslim women. They talked about Muslim women, and largely they misrepresented Muslim women. So I'm sharing with you a list of such writings, and you see the list. It's a long list, but this is not exhaustive. There are many other books that talk about Muslim women, and largely they misrepresent Muslim women. If you look at this, at the titles, all of these are about Muslim women. All of these are Orientalist, and all of these misrepresent Muslim women. So when writers like Shelina Janmohamed, they write, they have this long history, long Orientalist history in their mind. And all this Orientalist literature, they represent Muslim women as oppressed, passively submissive, and victimized by a gender inegalitarian and inferiorizing religion. These kind of literature represent Muslim women as oppressed, passively submissive, and victimized by a gender inegalitarian and inferiorizing religion, that is Islam. That means they are victimized by a religion that is unjust to women. So this is one group of literature that were produced on Muslim women. In the recent past, up until 9/11 or slightly after 9/11, we have a resurgence of such literature. We have a resurgence of such literature that caricature, distort the image of Muslim women. And I give you some other examples, like one book, let's say the Price of Honor, Muslim women lift the veil of silence on the Islamic world. And another book, Sold into Marriage, One Girl's Living Nightmare. Another book, Princess, a true story of life behind the veil in Saudi Arabia. Another book, Honor Lost, Love and Death in Modern Day Jordan. So all these books again caricature Muslim women and portray Muslim women as victims. And the culprit in most cases is the religion, that they are suffering because of their religion. And then we have another trend, another group of literature that again concerned Muslim women, but these are largely autobiographical. Women, they are telling their own stories. And in most cases, these stories are of Muslim women's stories, but the authors are not Muslim. For example, we may remember the controversy over this book, Sherry Jones' autobiographical narrative. The title is The Jewel of Medina. And in this book, she narrates the story of Aisha, as if she is Aisha, radiallahu anha. So this is autobiographical, but written by a non-Muslim. And then Swat is a Muslim woman name, and the title is Burnt Alive, a survivor of an honor killing speaks out. This is written by a French woman, Marie-Thérèse Cuny, but on the cover page, it's a Muslim woman, as if it is written by Muslim women, but the actual writer is a French woman. And then Nujud Ali's I Am Nujud, Age 10 and Divorce. This is again a book written by a French woman. And Sulimas and Halas Behind the Burqa, Our Life in Afghanistan. Again, this is written by a Western woman. So these are the traditions, literary traditions over centuries that misrepresented Muslim women and portray them as miserable and submissive, And in literature, we regard this kind of books as misery memoirs. These books always talks about the misery of Muslim women. That's why these are called misery memoirs. Now, in Muslim societies, we have another long list of writings. Women of Muslim background, they write about Muslim women's experience. And again, these are also full of distortion. I share with you another list of writings, and these are by Muslim women, women of Muslim background. And you see the list. Nawal al-Saadabi, she wrote Memoirs of a Woman Doctor, and The Hidden Face of Eve, Women in the Arab World, and Fatima Marnisi, Beyond the Veil, Male-Female Dynamics in Modern Muslim Society. Zana Mohsen, she is of Yemeni origin. She said, Sold, a story of modern day slavery. This is again autobiographical. She and her sister, they said that their father sold them back in Yemen in the name of marriage. And Latifa's My Forbidden Face, Growing Up Under the Taliban. And Azhar Nafisi's Reading Lolita in Tehran, and Ian Hirsi Ali's Infidels. So we have this list of Muslim women writers, writers of Muslim family, Muslim background. They also largely misrepresent the condition of Muslim women in Muslim societies. They perhaps take one sample and they generalize it. They are widely regarded in the literary establishment, and we in literature we call them native informant. These are native informant. This is a term that was more relevant to the colonial period, but still we have this kind of native informant, and those who are based in the West, they are called metropolitan native informant. So when writers like Laila Abu Laila, Shelina Janmohamed, or Moza Kahab, or Randa Abdel Fateh, when they write their books, their novels to describe the experiences of Muslim women, they have perhaps this long tradition of misrepresentation in front of them, and they are actually answering back. They are writing back to those misrepresentation. And Shelina Janmohamed, in her book, Love in Headscarf, she gives a list of images, how Muslim women have been represented in literature. And this is the image, this is the list. Oppressed, repressed, subjugated, backward, ignorant, violent, extremist, hateful, terrorist, jihadist, evil, radical, weakling, moderate, sellout, self-hating, apologist. So these are the usual image that we have of Muslim women in mainstream literature. And after 9/11 and after 7/7, by 7/7 I mean the 7th of July in 2005, when there was bombing in London. After these incidents, this kind of caricature, this kind of misrepresentation of Muslim women intensified because of the resurgence of Islamophobia, especially in the West. And although like Muslim women and Muslims in general were caricatured after 9/11 and after 7/7, but another fact is also there, like there was some kind of curiosity among people, especially in the West, to know more about Islam and Muslims. And I quote from Randa Abdel Fateh. She said, most intelligent people can see past the demonic and one-dimensional images of Muslims and are thirsting for an insight into the Muslim community. That is to say, after 9/11, after 7/7, and after all such major incidents, there is some kind of curiosity, some kind of thirst among the readership in the West to know more about the Muslim community and their religion. So writers like Shelina Janmohamed, they are capitalizing on it, and they are responding, addressing this thirst among the population to know more about Islam. And Shelina Janmohamed, actually, she describes at the beginning of her book, Love in a Headscarf, why she wrote this book. And I share with you this quote in the chat box. She said, I went into a bookshop promoting literature about Middle Eastern women, and all the book covers showed women in black veils, and they were about escaping from slavery and forced marriages. Are these writers Sunni Muslims? Personally, I don't worry about Sunni or Shia or whatever, but perhaps all of them are Sunni Muslims. This is my understanding. Even if not, I have no problem with that. So Shelina Janmohamed said, I went into a bookshop promoting literature about Middle Eastern women, and all the book covers showed women in black veils, and they were about escaping from slavery and forced marriages. I looked at them and thought none of them told my story. That is why I decided to write a book. I wanted people to stand in my shoes, so I write a quirky, irreverent book. So this is the background that motivated her to write the book Love in a Headscarf. And by writing the book, she is actually reclaiming her agency as a woman. This term agency in literature is a loaded term. It means the power to represent. When someone has the power to represent themselves, we use the term agency. And Muslim women were deprived of their agency for a long time. Other people talked about Muslim women, but Muslim women themselves did not speak. Even if they spoke, their voice was unheard of. That's why writers like Shelina Janmohamed, they are reclaiming their agency, their power to represent themselves. And even among Muslims, among the Muslims, Muslim women are often represented by Muslim men. Up until recently, most books on women's rights in Islam were written by Muslim men. We read books by Yusuf al-Qaradawi, Jamal al-Badawi, Tariq Ramadan, all books written by Muslim men about Muslim women. So Muslim women actually were rarely given the agency to talk about themselves, to talk about their experiences. So writers like Shelina Janmohamed, they are actually reclaiming their agency by producing this kind of books. Now, Shelina Janmohamed in this book, Love in a Headscarf, is countering a number of forces, a number of cultures. Number one, in her society in Britain, among the South Asian diaspora, there are migrants who are deeply entrenched in their South Asian culture, South Asian cultural practices. So she uses some characters. She calls them buxom aunties. I mean, old women, women of her mother's age or older. These women represent South Asian culture. There is another group of people in Muslim societies who are of secular orientation. So the first group, the aunties who represent the South Asian cultural practices, they actually do not stand for Islam. Their understanding of Islam is blended with their cultural practices. The second group, Muslims with secular orientation, they are hugely influenced by Western Orientalism and misrepresentation of Islam and Muslim. And then we have the Islamophobic hostile society, the society that is hostile to Islam. So all these three groups she is addressing in the book, and she does successfully. As regards her representation of South Asian culture and Islamic culture, she has one advantage. The advantage is, in literature we call it the third space. she is in a third space. What I mean by third space, like she is a Muslim, but she was born in Britain, and her aunties, the wider South Asian diaspora, they follow South Asian culture. But as a British-born Muslim, she can distance herself from the local culture, the host culture, that is British culture, and she can also distance herself from South Asian culture. Then she can look at both cultures from distance within the framework of Islam, and then she can see which practices in South Asian cultures are Islamic and which practices in South Asian culture are not Islamic. And in the same way, she can also look at the host culture, that is British culture, critically. She can look at British culture and see which practices are Islamic and which are not. So she assumes this third space, and through this third space, she can see without any cultural baggage. She can look at both cultures, both societies from a neutral point of view. So Muslim writers like Shelina Janmohamed, Randa Abdul Fateh, and the other names I mentioned, they have this advantage that they can look at their host culture and their culture of origin from a neutral point of view. Now, as regards women's position in society, in South Asian society, or in any former colonized society, we call them, they are doubly colonized. Women in this kind of societies are doubly colonized. We call it double colonization. Like they are colonized by the West, they are also colonized by patriarchy, by the gender bias. So this is why we call it double colonization. And in some cases, in my article that I wrote a few years ago on Shelina Janmohamed and Leila Abu Leila, I use the term triple colonization. Triple colonization in the sense that women in Britain, Muslim women, they are migrant, they are women, and they are Muslim. So all these three identities contribute to their colonization. That means to their suffering. They suffer because they are migrant. They are marginalized because they are migrant. They suffer because they are women. They suffer because they are Muslims. So this is a triple colonization. Now, the book, we will read some excerpt from the book, Love in a Headscarf. So in the book, Shelina Janmohamed is actually reclaiming love. What she means by it. Actually, when we hear the word love, we have all sorts of wrong associations. Like romantic love, and love is associated with obscenities and extramarital affairs and this and that. But she says at the beginning of the book that love is a fundamental component of Islamic teaching. So love is not something haram. Love is not something negative. Love is a fundamental component of Islamic teaching. So we need to reclaim love, and we need to put love in the right place. If love is practiced the right way, then it is not haram, it is not un-Islamic. And she says, as a Muslim woman, she has a double distress. She has a double distress. I think this phrase is important to understand the condition of Muslim women in today's society. She says, as a Muslim woman, she has a double distress. How? Like Muslim women are suffering because of their gender in Muslim society. This is one distress. The other distress is non-Muslims especially Islamophobic non-Muslims, they blame the religion of Islam for the suffering of Muslim women. In that sense, Muslim women have another distress, that their religion is being attacked. So she says, as a Muslim woman, I have a double distress. I suffer because of my gender. I also suffer because of my religion, because my religion is being attacked, is being slammed, is being slandered on a regular basis in the media, in the books, in here and there. So she says, our suffering, the suffering of Muslim women, is a double distress. And the story is like hers, and she is an Oxford graduate. She studied at Oxford University. And she says, my story is not there. Nobody talks about my experience, how I feel empowered, how I feel liberated as a Muslim woman. And she said that in Muslim societies, in South Asian Muslim societies, education of women or female education is not encouraged. And this is a fact. Even though Islam highly encourages both men and women to acquire knowledge and to excel in education, but in culture, South Asian culture, Muslim women are not encouraged to receive higher education. And I quote this excerpt from her book. She said, I have been told repeatedly by the elders and aunties that I am too confident and clever, and that boys don't like that. If a Muslim woman is confident and clever, boys do not, or men do not want to marry them. If I am serious about getting married, I will have to hide it. Even if I have some knowledge and scholarship, I will have to hide it. Showing a glimpse is fine, but it is crucial that the boys don't think I am too clever. The aunties have even gone so far as to say that I must not study a master's or heaven forbid, a PhD. That I should not study a master's or PhD because nobody will want to marry me. Then I will have only myself to blame. Nobody wants a girl who is too educated, they advise me. Then you will be old and left on the shelf. Better to get married first, sort out your husband, and then you can do as you please. So this is her experience. This is a memoir. She is talking about her life experiences. She says this is how in Muslim societies, in South Asian Muslim societies, in some cases, Muslim women are discouraged to receive higher education, to receive further education. This is a cultural notion, this is a cultural idea, and she, as a Muslim woman, as an educated Muslim woman, she wants to separate Islam from culture. And that is one reason why she wrote this book. And then one of her aunties said to her, this is an interesting quote. She said, what you need a master's for, to clean the kitchen, I don't know. For the more buxom of the buxom aunties, masters of making roti and biryani. So this is how she was snuffed off, and she was reprimanded when she wanted to receive higher education. Her auntie said that you don't need a master's to make roti and biryani. And in their understanding, the main role of a woman is to work in the kitchen and prepare food. And also when Shelina Janmohamed was talking to a potential groom, that groom was feeling some kind of discomfort, that he was talking to an intelligent woman. He was feeling unease, and he was saying, you must be very intelligent. And that was some reason for discomfort for him. So this is how Shelina Janmohamed is separating Islam from culture and culture from Islam. She says, even though in culture, female education is discouraged, but this is not what Islam says. And another aspect that she highlights in the book is the question of marriage. How in Muslim societies, marriage is dealt with, how marriage is handled, and how it is not always Islamic. The way marriage is handled in Muslim societies, especially South Asian Muslim societies, she says this is not very much Islamic. Why? Because it is considered a kind of prohibited for a woman to initiate a marriage proposal. A woman cannot initiate a marriage proposal. So this is a cultural notion. And then she refutes this cultural notion by giving examples from Islamic history, from Islamic tradition. She gives the example of Safura and Musa. When Musa was escaped from the oppression of Firaun, obviously he took refuge in the house of Safura and her father, and it was Safura who initiated the marriage, not Musa. So this is one example that Shelina Janmohamed provides to say that the cultural notion that women cannot initiate marriage is not Islamic. Because in the Islamic tradition, we have this example of Safura, who initiated marriage with Musa. And then she gives the example of Hazrat Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha, again, who herself was the person who initiated the marriage proposal. I share with you this quote from her book. She says, "We pointed out to each other how Khadija, the Prophet Muhammad's first wife, who was herself a successful businesswoman, had taken the initiative in sending a marriage proposal to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And yet, despite this, we felt through the force of cultural standard that it would be too shameful to call them." So this is how Shelina Janmohamed actually is refuting some cultural practices which are prevalent in South Asian society, but which have no legitimacy in the normative teachings of Islam. Another interesting incident that she mentions in the book is that once Shelina Janmohamed wanted to climb Mount Kilimanjaro in Tanzania. She told her family and her aunties that she wanted to climb the mountain. And then all of them discouraged her. Why? Because you are a woman. You cannot, you should not climb a mountain. That is a man's job. You should not do it. Then Shelina Janmohamed, she refuted their argument by giving another example from the Islamic tradition. She said, the wife of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam climbed a mountain, and I am going to do the same. She refers to those 40 days when Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was contemplating in cave Hira, and Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha used to bring food for him in the top of the mountain. So she says, if the Prophet's wife can climb a mountain, why can't I as a Muslim do the same? So again, by using examples from the Islamic tradition, she is refuting cultural practices that are prevalent among Muslim women. And then she also talks about the predicaments, the ordeals of Muslim women after the 9/11 incident. And she says that even though the 9/11 incident was perpetrated by men, whoever they were, it was perpetrated by men, but the victims in the West were mainly Muslim women. Because Muslim women, they were easily identified because of their dress code, because of their hijab, and they were harassed, they were attacked, and we heard of many incidents And actually, I was in Britain at that time when all this happened in the aftermath of 9/11, like how Muslim women in the street of London and in other cities were being harassed and attacked by Islamophobes. So she narrates one story. She said, "It wasn't easy. Fear and violence were affecting all of us. One of my headscarf wearing friends was punched and her nose broken as she sat quietly on the train home. Her aggressor muttered profanities about her faith and about her terrorist activities as he went on to terrorize her himself. He inflicted shattering pain on her face and then walked off at the next station. Even when he was gone, the other passengers left her to bleed. Nobody showed any sympathy for these hijab-wearing Muslim women." Brother, I see your question. We will discuss this question toward the end of this lecture. You are most welcome to ask me questions at the end of my lecture, not now. This is a kind of interruption to my lecture, please. Now, as I said earlier, like Shelina Janmohamed is separating religion from culture by writing this book. And I quote another excerpt from this book where she talks about this issue. She says, "Islam was held almost entirely responsible for all the violence conducted in non-Western countries against Muslim women, even though such horrible acts were usually driven by culture, the cycle of underdevelopment and a lack of education." So she believes that, and this is true, that Muslim women suffer in Muslim societies, non-Western societies, not because of Islam, rather because of culture, because of cultural practices, and because of underdevelopment, poverty, and lack of education, not necessarily because of their religion. And this is a long quote, but I think we should discuss this, how in South Asian societies, religion and culture are mixed, are blended together. She said back home, that means in South Asian society, it was assumed that culture was Islamic. It was taken for granted. No questions were asked about whether what people really did was no longer any. Okay, I have experienced the same situation on the train to Portsmouth Uni, harassed by the hooligans on their way to a match. Yes, I was in Portsmouth, by the way, from 2002 to 2007. Thank you for sharing your experience. Let us read this quote. Okay, no questions were asked about whether what people really did were Islamic or not. In their new home, each action had to be reassessed. There was no longer any assumption that any activity was de facto Islamic. So she said, since we are now in a third space, as I said earlier, that as a Muslim woman, Shelina Janmohamed is in a third space. She can look at culture from a neutral point of view. So she said that in their new home, that means in Britain, each action had to be reassessed. There was no longer any assumption that any activity was a de facto Islamic. When the new generation like me grew up in Britain, every action that was a remnant from other cultures had to be challenged and justified. It was no longer good enough for an action to be based on how it is. It is what parents found hardest, that they were being challenged. Many saw it as a sign of rebellion against them, when it was far from them. It wasn't them as people who were being analyzed, but whether the customs that were being practiced were really Islamic as they claimed them to be. So this is what writers like Shelina Janmohamed do in their writing, in their books. They are looking at cultural practices through a new lens, because they are now in the third space from which they can look at their culture and their religion from a neutral point of view. Now, in her book, she talks about a lot about hijab, about headscarf, and how headscarf is considered as a mark of backwardness, as a mark of ignorance. And she narrates one incident. She and some of her friends went to the Arab world to visit to make holiday. And there she met a French a French young woman named Anne. Perhaps this is a pseudonym, not a real name. So they met these French women. When the French women saw these hijab-wearing Muslim women traveling, this is what she said to them. You people are backward, living in the Middle Ages with the religion of ignorant Arabs. You should get educated, learn some proper values like we have developed in Europe. This is what the French woman is saying to Shelina Janmohamed, who is an Oxford graduate. Now, in reply, not in reply, this is how Shelina Janmohamed expressed her experience, her feeling, how she felt when that French woman said that to them. She said, I fumed defiantly beneath the scorching sun. How dare she suggest we were oppressed? We were educated at one of the most prestigious universities in the world. We spoke probably 10 languages between us, had read a wide variety of literature from numerous cultures and languages, and had also traveled to many countries. Here we are, right in front of Anne, traveling unaccompanied in the Middle East of our own choice. Surely no one could count us as oppressed. She looked at us as though we were duck droppings. So she actually points to a cultural notion, especially in the West. Whenever people see a Muslim woman in hijab, they immediately generalize her as an uneducated, backward woman. So in their eyes, a Muslim woman from a village, uneducated Muslim woman who wears hijab, and a Muslim woman who is a university professor who wears hijab, they are the same. Both of them are backward, both of them are uneducated, both of them are ignorant. This is how non-Muslims think about Muslim women. But the condition of hijab wearing Muslim women among Muslims is also not very good, is also not very encouraging, because in Muslim societies, hijab wearing Muslim women are marginalized. They are also reprimanded by so-called ultra-secular forces who regard hijab as a mark of oppression, as a mark of backwardness. And Shelina Janmohamed, in this book, she talks about how Muslim men are reluctant to marry Muslim women who wear hijab. They want to marry Muslim women who do not want to wear hijab, but they are reluctant to marry Muslim women who want to wear hijab. And she had a conversation with a Muslim man. His name is Hasan in the book, and he was reluctant to marry Shelina Janmohamed, and he said it openly because she wears hijab. And in reply, this is what Shelina Janmohamed said. Is it that you want to show your wife off to your friends to point out how pretty she is? If I wear hijab, then you can't exhibit me. This was telling a very stark, a very blunt response to this man who was reluctant to marry a hijab-wearing Muslim women. So he wanted, obviously, he stands for many men who wanted to show off their wives, wanted to exhibit their wife to society and to tell the society, to show the society that their wives are beautiful. But Shelina Janmohamed says, no, this is not for me. I cannot take off my hijab because of marriage. And this is, she also said this, she adds, she said, marriage was important, but it was supposed to complete my faith, not destroy it. If I take off my hijab, then for the sake of marriage, then marriage is going to diminish my faith, is going to destroy my faith. But marriage in Islam is supposed to complete my faith, not to diminish it, not to destroy it. So there are few other issues, like the issue of representation that Shelina Janmohamed highlights. I think I will stop after discussing this aspect from the book. She says that in conventional literary representation, in conventional literary culture, Muslim women who wear hijab, they are marginalized. In many cases, they are not given a space to represent themselves, or their voices are not given space. So this is what she says in the book. I wanted to contribute to the social discourse about gender inequality, but Muslim women who wore the veil by choice and by extension who embraced Islam as a positive force were not allowed to have a say. Only Muslim women who had openly rejected Islam were allowed to be part of the discussion. I was an inadmissible feminist. So she said, I also talk about women's rights. I'm a feminist. I promote women's rights. I am fighting for women's rights. But because I wear hijab and because I embrace Islam as a positive force, I am denied access to this mainstream discussion on women and gender, on women's rights. So I believe this is a very interesting book. All of I mean, those of us who can spare some time should read it. This is a very good rebuttal, a very good refutation to many accusations against Islam, many unfair attacks on Islam that are coming from various quarters. So I believe this is a must-read book. If possible, please read it. So we have roughly 5 minutes. I will be happy to entertain queries and questions. And I will also welcome any contributions from my brothers and sisters. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Thank you so much. Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah, Prof. Is she also famous on the YouTube? I haven't checked on her. Is she giving
yes,
a talk?
if you write Shelina Janmohamed in YouTube, you will find many interviews of her. Like she was interviewed by the BBC, by Sky, and many other channels. And she was also included in one of the 100 influential Muslims in British society.
Oh, okay.
So she is quite famous in Britain, and obviously her education also had a part in it. She is an Oxford graduate and a brilliant woman.
Okay, we open to all brothers and sisters. Any chance she come to this region, bro?
She came to Malaysia a few times.
Oh, okay.
And she has been to Indonesia and many other places as an invited speaker to different forums.
Okay, that'd be great. Yeah. Okay, we have one from Brother Nuruddin, bro, at the end.
How do you view Peter More's ideas? Actually, Peter More is married to Amina Yakin. Amina Yakin is of Pakistani origin. She is also a lecturer at SOAS, and both of them live in London. So I know Peter More, and I also know his wife, Amina Yakin, and I believe both of them are doing a wonderful job. They are talking about Islamophobia. They are talking about how Muslims are misrepresented in literature, in culture, in media. So I have high regard for both of them, both Amina Yakin and Peter Morris, and both of them co-authored some books, which are highly of very good quality. And I am often in touch with Amina Yakin. Sometimes I seek her advice on different research projects, and both of them are very good. And I believe this is also a very good book, Islamophobia and the Novel, where they talk about how literature is being used to promote Islamophobia. And this is the same thing that Edward Said discusses in Culture and Imperialism, which is a foundational book to say how to talk about literature and how literature is used to caricature, to misrepresent, to colonize other peoples.
Okay. Anyone want to ask live? We can unmute. This is our final class. Okay, Prof. Alhamdulillah. We give you more time to make a final remark for the whole 7 classes, Prof. Put it in perspective.
Actually, yeah. As you said earlier today in this class, it's not possible to cover all major Islamic writers in a series of 7 lectures. We need hundreds of lectures to talk about all major Muslim writers. So what I wanted to do is just to create some curiosity among us so that we feel encouraged to read more Muslim authors. And this is part of our project. And in the integration of knowledge discourse, we say Ihya'ut Turathul Islami, the revival of Islamic heritage. So when we discuss writers like Ibn Hazm, Hasan ibn Sabit, Rumi, Iqbal, this is part of Ihya'ut Turathul Islami, the revival of Islamic heritage. And it is our responsibility to revive our Islamic heritage. If we do not do it, who else will do that? So that's why we need to come forward and engage intellectually in this project. And this is a difficult project, but this is worth doing. I can share with my brothers and sisters my own personal experience. I teach a course at International Islamic University. The course title is Islamic Literature in English. When teaching this subject, I see that there are not many materials written on Islamic writers by Muslims. And the few materials that I find written by Muslims are not of good quality. Obviously, there are some honorable exceptions. Like I found a book on Muhammad Iqbal by Mustansir Mir, which is of very good quality. But quite often, I am disappointed by materials, books, articles produced by Muslims on Muslim writers. These are not of very good quality, and I cannot share those with my students because of poor quality. So that's why I believe people like us, we need to be more hardworking, and we need to excel in scholarship so that we can produce quality materials on this kind of writers. And only then they will be highlighted, they will get the recognition they deserve, and only then people around the world will benefit from writers like Iqbal, writers like Rumi. And when we are discussing Rumi, we discuss how grossly distorted Rumi is through translation. And we also discussed that it was possible because we Muslims did not do our part. That's why I want to end this course with a request to all of you. Please let us be more hardworking. Let us engross ourselves in scholarship. Let us produce quality material so that we can promote Islamic causes. And if we promote Islamic causes, that will be a blessing for humanity, not only for Muslims, for all people on earth.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Prof. I did listen one lecture on Islamophobia by Dr. Anis in UK. This is a really concerted effort, not just sporadic here and there. Been written since the 1960s. So as Prof said, we really need to work hard to produce more quality material, more quality books, not only to confront, but to educate also our young generation.
Yes.
So authors like Shelina Janmohamed and of course classical authors must be brought forward. Everyone has to know about them. Thank you so much, Prof. We'll see you again in other classes.
Brother Sharan, I have the book. I will send you the book. If possible, please, you will share with my brothers and sisters.
Oh, yes,
Maybe
yes.
some of them will be interested to read it.
Yes, sure. Yeah.
Okay. So I seek forgiveness for all my lapses and shortcomings. So please forgive me if I have done anything wrong. And I'm very happy that my brothers and sisters have showed so much interest in this course. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Okay, everyone, we'll see in other classes.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum.
Salam wa rahmatullah.